Hello, Punky. You want to come up and see me? Come on up. Come and look at everybody coming. Come. Come on up. Come. You come up and sit on my lap? Hmm? Would you like to sit on my lap? Huh? Well, come on. Like to sit on my lap? Be fine. It's fine if you like. You sit on my lap anytime. Come on up. Nice. Punky's going to help me read tonight. Really glad you're all here. She's been standoffish today, except when she wants to be. Anyway, she's being friendly. I just fed her and she's full. So, aren't we all a lot more friendly and much more balanced when we're full? You know, I find I can't even think straight if I haven't eaten all day. And one of the things about this coronavirus situation is that we need to care for ourselves. As a friend who is not a believing Christian said, well, what are the two things that God told us to do? And he's, I don't know where she got it, but she didn't know where she got it, but it says that we are to love others as we love ourselves. And a lot of us don't love ourselves. I've struggled with that all my life because of abandonment issues. I really not liked myself, and I'm so glad to be here sharing this with you because I think the coronavirus and the sheltering in place has really pushed a lot of buttons in a lot of people, and we're now at the stage where it's been long enough that mental health for some people is really deteriorating. And I just want to encourage any of you who know of anybody alone or a single mother or whatever, I keep repeating myself, but it's worth repeating. Reach out to someone who you can think of that's alone, maybe somebody you haven't thought of before, because it's not about what we're going through at the time, but it's the common experience that this kind of isolation situation makes you weird. I mean, every day I kind of go up and down, and my best friend Ben just called me yesterday and he said, well, he said, no matter what you're feeling, it's really not your fault. He said, we're both alike, we're both extroverts, and extroverts being cooped up like this is really a prison. And for someone that's an introvert, this is like heaven. My friend Ed Nippers, who I'm going to be interviewing him about his wonderful painting, The Harrowing of Hell, next week sometime, and I'll be broadcasting it. So tomorrow, anyway, he was saying that his brother-in-law was staying with him, and his brother-in-law loves nothing more than being an introvert, so he was having a great time. He did all kinds of things and was happy to be in his room all day and never say a boo. I unfortunately am the opposite. I have a thoughtful side, but I gotta have hugs and connections with people. Abigail and Nathan came down last weekend, which helped, and we're now building, just for all of you to know, as part of the family that's near each other, we're building a victory garden this weekend, and we'll share the vegetables, and if Rachel comes down, we can share them with her and she can take them back to Brooklyn. I don't think I can send them, it'll be too complicated. But I'm really thrilled that we'll be able to we're going to build the beds and everything, and we were able to get everything. This is the other thing, if there are projects you want to do, people are very glad to have business. Abigail's church in Baltimore wanted to feed people, and so instead of having a kitchen, they have a very small building and a small congregation. They decided they wanted to find a way to support and encourage restaurants in the neighborhood. And so they started a fund to raise money for meals that could be given to people in need, but produced by restaurants, and they would pay the restaurants the fee. Well, their goal was $4,000 as of last Sunday. I may be repeating myself, but it's worth repeating. Their goal was $4,000. They've surpassed, way past that to $12,000 they have right now. And because of it, as the minister said, it would not be something that I would want to happen to make this happen, but there's always some kind of redemptive thing in the middle of disaster, and it kind of answers the question, why would God allow evil? I never will be able to answer that. I still ask that question, but however, within that, he is redemptive and active within it. When he comes to destroy it, nobody knows. Not even him, only the Father. So just, I want to encourage you, any way you can reach out. You could, like, I was able to get pieces of wood custom cut and not delivered, but I could pick it up today, and I was able to call this morning and get mulch and topsoil for tomorrow. And they were really thankful that we even asked them to do something, because businesses are really hurting. And as I share with you at the end again, and I'm going to keep doing it for a few nights because we don't quite get it, things aren't going to be the same. This is probably going to take a year or even longer maybe before anything gets back where we can just move freely again. But there is no such, as I said 3 times now, there is no such thing as normal. We are not going back to quote unquote our normal life. We need to take that out of our vocabulary. New normal, that's also needs to go out, and a few other things. So we'll be talking about that later, but now we need to, the horse and his boy, it was a victim of the coronavirus in my brain, and I skipped chapter 12, and I thought for sure I read it, but I just, looking at it, I realized it didn't, and thank goodness for my longtime friend, Jack Lucky. He didn't chive me and just said, I think you didn't read chapter 12, so we're going to do that tonight. And if any of you want, I'll do 13 over again because it was so exciting. I wouldn't mind, but we don't have to. We can go on to 14. Maybe I can do kind of a synopsis of 13 tomorrow and then go on to 14. So this chapter is Shasta and Narnia. Was it all a dream, wondered Shasta? But it couldn't have been a dream, for there in the grass before him he saw the deep, large print of the lion's front right paw. It took one's breath away to think of the weight that could make a footprint like that. But there was something more remarkable than the size about it. As he looked at it, water had already filled the bottom of it. Soon it was full to the brim, then overflowing, and a little stream was running downhill past him over the grass. Shasta stopped and drank a very long drink, and then dipped his face in and splashed his head. Doesn't that sound great? It would sound really fun to do right now. It was extremely cold. The water was extremely cold and clear as glass, and refreshed him very much. It's kind of warm tonight. It's the first night it's been kind of warm. A bit humid, so that nice cold water sounds like a really good idea. I've been cold all week. After that, he stood up, shaking the water out of his ears and flinging the wet hair back from his forehead, and began to take stock of his surroundings. Apparently, it was still very early morning. The sun had only just risen, and it had risen out of the forest, which he saw low down and far away on his right. The country which he was looking at was absolutely new to him. It was a green valley land dotted with trees, through which he caught the gleam of a river that wound away roughly to the northwest. On the far side of the valley there were high and even rocky hills, but they were lower than the mountains he had seen yesterday. Then he began to guess where he was. He turned and looked behind him and saw that the slope on which he was standing belonged to a range of far higher mountains. I see, said Shasta to himself. Those are the big mountains between Archenland and Narnia. I was on the other side of them yesterday. I must have come through the pass in the night. What luck that I hit it. At last, what luck that I hit it. At least it wasn't luck at all, really. It was him. And now I'm in Narnia. So it was him. He took action and found it. It wasn't just luck, but he took initiative and was able to go through the pass. He turned and unsaddled his horse and took off his bridle. Though you are a perfectly horrid horse, he said. It took no notice of this remark and immediately began eating grass, as horses do. That horse had a very low opinion of Shasta, so he just ignored him and ate grass. I wish I could eat grass, thought Shasta. It's no good going back to Anbird. It's all besieged. I better get lower down in the valley and see if I can get anything to eat. So he went on downhill. The thick dew was cruelly cold to his bare feet, till he came into a wood. There was a kind of track running through it, and he had not followed this for many minutes when he heard a thick and rather wheezy voice saying to him, "Good morning, neighbor." Shasta looked around eagerly to find the speaker, and presently saw a small, prickly person with a dark face who had just come out from among the trees. At least it was small for a person, but very big indeed for a hedgehog, which is what it was. Oh my. "Good morning," said Shasta, "but I'm not a neighbor. In fact, I'm a stranger in these parts." "Ah," said the hedgehog inquiringly, "I've come over the mountains from Archenland, you know." "Ah, Archenland," said the hedgehog. "That's a terrible long way. Never been there myself." "And I think, perhaps," said Shasta, "someone ought to be told that there's an army of savage Calormenes attacking Anvert at this very moment." "You don't say so," answered the hedgehog. "Well, think of that. And they do say that Calormen is hundreds and thousands of miles away, right at the world's end, across the great sea of sand." "It's not nearly as far as you think," said Shasta. "And oughtn't something to be done about this attack on Anvert? Oughtn't your High King be told?" "Certain sure, something ought to be done about it," said the hedgehog. Hedgehogs are lazy. "But you see, I'm just on my way to bed for a good day's sleep." "Hello, neighbor." I've been feeling more like a hedgehog lately. I don't know about you, but I wake up tired. The last words were addressed to an immense biscuit-colored rabbit whose head had just popped up from the somewhere beside the path. The hedgehog immediately told the rabbit what it had just learned from Shasta. The rabbit agreed that this was very remarkable news, and that somebody ought to tell someone about it with a view to doing something. And so it went on. Every few minutes they were joined by other creatures, some from other branches overhead, some from little underground houses at their feet, till the party consisted of 5 rabbits, a squirrel, 2 magpies, a goat-foot fawn, and a mouse, who all talked at the same time and all agreed with the hedgehog. But the truth was, in that golden age, when the witch and the winter had gone and Peter High King ruled at Cair Paravel, the smaller woodland people of Narnia were so safe and happy that they were getting a little careless. Oh dear. That's what happens right now. You know, now that we've sheltered in place, we have to be careful we don't get careless, because we'd like to be. I'd like to see people and grab them. At least say hello to them. Presently, however, 2 more practical people arrived in the little wood. One was a red dwarf, whose name appeared to be Duffel. The other was a stag, a beautiful, lordly creature with wide, liquid eyes, dappled flanks, and legs so thin and graceful that they looked as if they could break them. You could break them with 2 fingers. "Lion alive!" roared the dwarf as soon as he had heard the news. And if that's so, we were all standing still, chattering. And if that's so, why are we still standing still, chattering? "Enemies at Anvert! News must be sent to Cair Paravel at once. The army must be called out. Narnia must go to the aid of King Lune." "Ah," said the hedgehog, "but you won't find the High King at the Cair. He's away to the north, trouncing those giants." I'm talking of giants, neighbors. That puts me in line. "Who will take our message?" interrupted the dwarf. "Anyone here got more speed than me?" "I've got speed," said the stag. "What's my message? How many Calormenes?" 200 under Prince Rabadash, but the stag was already away, all four legs off the ground at once. In a moment, and its white stern had disappeared among the remoter trees. Wonder where he's going, said the rabbit. He won't find the High King at Cair Paravel, you know. He'll find Queen Lucy, said Duffel. And then, hello. What's wrong with the human? It looks pretty green. Why, I do believe it's quite faint. Perhaps it's mortal hungry. When did you last have a meal, youngster? Yesterday morning, said Shasta weakly. Well, come on then, come on, said the dwarf, at once throwing back his little arms around Shasta's waist to support him. Why, neighbors, we all ought to be ashamed. Why, neighbors, we ought to all be ashamed of ourselves. You come with me, lad, breakfast, better than talking. That's a good lesson for us, too, our neighbors. With a great deal of bustle, muttering reproaches to itself, the dwarf had led and half supported Shasta at a great speed further into the wood and a little downhill. It was a longer walk than Shasta wanted at that moment, and his legs had begun to feel very shaky before they came out from the trees onto the bare hillside. There they found a little house with smoking chimney and open door, and as they came to the doorway, Duffel called out, "Hey, brothers, a visitor for breakfast." And immediately, mixed with a sizzling sound, there came to Shasta a simply delightful smell. It was one he had never smelt in his life before, but I hope you have. It was in fact the smell of bacon and eggs and mushrooms all frying in a pan. It was making me hungry. "Mind your head, lad," said Duffel, a moment too late, for Shasta had already bashed his forehead against the low lintel of the door. "Now," continued the dwarf, "sit you down. The table's a bit low for you, but then the stool's low too. That's right, and here's porridge, and here's a jug of cream, and here's a spoon." By the time Shasta had finished his porridge, the dwarf's two brothers, whose names were Rogan and Bricklethumb, were putting the dish of bacon and eggs and mushrooms in the coffee pot and the hot milk and the toast on the table. It was all new and wonderful to Shasta, for Calormene food was quite different. He didn't even know what the slices of brown stuff were, for he had never seen toast before. He didn't know what the yellow soft thing they smeared on the toast was, because in Calormene you nearly always got oil instead of butter. And the house itself was quite different from the dark, frosty, fish-smelling huts of Arshish, and from the pillared and carpeted hills in the palace of Tashkent. The roof was very low, and everything was made of wood, and there was a cuckoo clock and a red and white checked tablecloth and a bowl of wild flowers and little curtains on the thick paneled windows. It was also rather troublesome, having to use dwarf cups and plates and knives and forks. This meant that helpings were very small, but then there were a great many helpings, so that Shasta's plate or cup was being filled every moment. And every moment the dwarfs themselves were saying, "Butter, please, another cup of coffee, I'd like a few more mushrooms, what about frying another egg or so?" And when at last they had all eaten as much as they possibly could, the three dwarfs drew lots for who would do the washing up. And Rogan was the unlucky one. Then Duffel and Bricklethumb took Shasta outside to a bench which ran across the cottage wall. They all stretched out their legs and gave a great sigh of contentment, and the two dwarfs lit their pipes. The dew was off the grass now, and the sun was warm. Indeed, if there hadn't been a light breeze, it would have been too hot. "Now, stranger," said Duffel, "I'll show you the lie of the land. You can see nearly all South Narnia from here, and we're rather proud of the view. Right away on your left, beyond these near hills, you can just see the western mountains, and thus the round hill away on your right, and called the Hill of the Stone Table, just beyond." But at that moment he was interrupted by a snore from Shasta, who, what with his night's journey and his excellent breakfast, had fallen fast asleep. The kindly dwarfs, as soon as they noticed him, began making signs to each other. As soon as they noticed this, they began making signs to each other and to each other not to wake him, and indeed did so, much whispering and nodding and getting up and tiptoeing away, that they certainly would have waked him if he had been less tired. He slept pretty well nearly all day, but woke up in time for supper. The beds in that house were all too small for him, but they made him a fine bed of heather on the floor, and he never stirred nor dreamed all night. Isn't that wonderful? Wouldn't you love to have a night's sleep like that? Next morning they had finished breakfast when they heard a shrill, exacting sound from outside. "Trumpets," said all the dwarfs, as they and Shasta all came running out. The trumpets sounded again, a new noise to Shasta, not huge or solemn like the horns of Tashbaan, not gay and merry like King Moon's hunting horn, but clear and sharp and valiant. The noise was coming from the woods to the east, and soon there was a noise of horse hoofs mixed with it. A moment later, the head of the column came into light. First came Lord Peredan on a bay horse carrying the great banner of Narnia, a red lion on a green ground. Shasta knew him at once. Then came 3 people riding abreast, 2 on great chargers and 1 on a pony. The 2 on the chargers were King Edmund and the fair-haired lady with a very merry face, who wore a helmet and a mail shirt and carried a bow across her shoulder and a quiver of arrows at her side. "The Queen Lucy," whispered Duffel. But the one on the pony was Corin. After that came the main body of the army, men on ordinary horses, men on talking horses who didn't mind being ridden on proper occasions, as when Narnia went to war. Centaurs, stern, hard-bitten bears, great talking dogs, and last of all, 6 giants. That's quite a crew, isn't it? For there are good giants in Narnia. But though he knew they were on the right side, Shasta at first could hardly bear to look at them. There are some things that take a lot of getting used to, isn't that right? Like what we've been doing for the last weeks. Just as the king and queen reached the cottage and the dwarfs began making low bows to them, King Edmund called out, "Now friends, time for a halt and a morsel." And at once there was a great bustle of people dismounting and haversacks being opened and conversations beginning, and Corin came running up to Shasta and seized both of his hands and cried, "What, you here? So you got through all right? I am so glad. Now we shall see some sport. And isn't it luck? We only get into the harbor at Cair-Barraville yesterday morning, and the very first person we meet was Sherby the stag, and all this news of an attack on Angord. Don't you think?" "Who is your Highness's friend?" said King Edmund, who just got off his horse. "Don't you see, sire?" said Corin. "It's my double, the boy you mistook for me at Tashbaan." "Why, so he is your double," exclaimed Queen Lucy. "As like as 2 twins. This is a marvelous thing." "Please, your majesty," and Shasta to King Edmund, "I was no traitor, really I wasn't, but I couldn't help hearing your plans. But I'd never dreamed of telling them to your enemies." "I know now that you were no traitor, boy," said King Edmund, laying his hand on Shasta's head. "But if you would not be taken for one at another time, try not to hear what's meant for others' ears." It was all as well, he was scolding him. After that there was so much bustle and talk and coming and going that Shasta for a few minutes lost sight of Corin and Edmund and Lucy. The Corin was the sort of boy whom one is sure to hear of pretty soon, and it wasn't very long before Shasta heard King Edmund saying in a loud voice, "By the lion's mane, Prince, this is too much. Will your Highness never be better? You are more of a heart scald than our whole army together. It's as lief had a regiment of hornets in my command as you." I'd as lief, I would prefer a regiment of hornets in my command as you. Shasta worried his way through the crowd. Sorry, my light isn't very good here tonight. Shasta wormed his way through the crowd, and there he saw Edmund, looking very angry indeed. Corin looking a little ashamed of himself, and a strange dwarf sitting on the ground making faces. A couple of fawns had apparently just been helping it out of its armor. If I had put my cordial with me, Queen Lucy was saying, I could soon mend this. But the High King has strictly charged me not to carry it commonly to the wars, and to keep it only for great extremities. What had happened is this. As soon as Corin had spoken to Shasta, Corin's elbow had been plucked by a dwarf in the army called Thornbutt. What is it, Thornbutt? Corin had said. Your Royal Highness, said Thornbutt, drawing him aside. Our march today will bring us through the pass and right to your royal father's castle. We may be in battle before night. I know, said Corin. Isn't it splendid? Splendid or not, said Thornbutt, I have the strictest orders from King Edmund to see to it that your highness is not in the fight. You will be allowed to see it, but that's treat enough for your highness, little years. Oh, what nonsense, Corin burst out. Of course I'm going to fight. Why, the Queen Lucy's going to be with the archers. The Queen's grace will do as she pleases, said Thornbutt. But you are in my charge. Either I must have your solemn and princely word that you'll keep your pony beside mine, not half a neck ahead, till I give your highness leave to depart, or else. It is his majesty's word we must go on with our wrists tied together like two prisoners. I'll knock you down if you try to bind me, said Corin. I'd like to see your highness do it, said the dwarf. That was quite enough for a boy like Corin, and in a second he and the dwarf were at the hammer and tongs. It could have been an even match, for though Corin had longer arms and more height, the dwarf was older and tougher. But it was never fought out. That's the worst of fights on a rough hillside, it never gets done. For by very bad luck, Thornbutt trod on a loose stone, came flat down on his nose, and found when he tried to get up that he had sprained his ankle. A really excruciating sprain, which would keep him from walking or riding for at least a fortnight. See what your highness has done, said King Edmund. Deprived us of a proved warrior on the very edge of battle. I'll take his place, sire, said Corin. Pshaw, said Edmund. No one doubts your courage. But a boy in battle is a danger only to his own side. At that moment the king was called away to attend to something else. And Corin, after apologizing handsomely to the dwarf, rushed up to Shasta and whispered, Quick! There's a spare pony now in the dwarf's armor. Put it on before anyone notices. What for? Said Shasta. Why, so that you and I can fight in the battle, of course. Don't you want to? Oh, yes, said Shasta. But he hadn't been thinking of doing so at all, and began to get a most uncomfortable, pricky feeling in his spine. That's right, said Corin, over your head. Now the sword belt. Put it on. But we must ride near the tail of the column and keep as quiet as mice. Once the battle begins, everyone will be far too busy to notice us. There ended the lesson that should have been last night, and you let me know if you want to have me do 13 over again. I heard a strange sound at the door. I think there's somebody that's coming in. It's not Punky, because Punky's right here. I'm going to go look, and I'll be right back. It may be a surprise visitor. I'm not sure. I'll be right back. Hang on, and I will give you the postlude. rabbits all came to visit each other. Well, guess what? One of the rabbits got loose and came to see us. So here is, his name is not Peter, but he's a rabbit. And he's a rabbit, he's actually a cookie jar, which is really fun. But this is a rabbit that has been in our family for a long time. And anyway, he came back to visit, and I gave him a carrot. He said to come in and say hi. Hi, everybody. Glad to have you here. So he just came back from Narnia and wanted to be sure that you saw what he looked like. So thank you for coming. I'm going to put you down here near the feed, and then I'm going to go on with my story. So you just sit there and talk to Punky. The two of you can visit with each other. Punky's not interested. So I showed you this last night, and I want to show it again. This is a portrait of my daughter Rachel when she was 16. Hope you can see it. You've seen it before. But this is how we see our lives up until the coronavirus. We paint an imaginary perfect picture of our lives. We belong here in America, we belong to the right clubs, we have the right jobs, we wear the right clothes, we do the right things, our kids go to the right schools, and we've been able up till now to paint this perfect picture of our lives as we want it to be. We can create it. But with this illness and plague, we can't. And one of the things, this picture here is what my friend calls, oh, it's normal. I can't go back to normal. And as I said several times now, normal is no longer a word that we use, because even new normal doesn't fit what's happened. Because no matter if we were over it in a month, it may drag on for a year, the implications of it for sure. We can't go back to the way life was when it was before. I've just realized how different my life is now and how difficult this is. But I also, like last night after I read the story, chapter 13, I sat here with the fire all evening and looked out across the street at the church, and the beauty of the night, walked out on Route 50 and there were no cars. And I just thought, this is like the someday dream. It doesn't have to be this beautiful. It could be anywhere, but just the fact that there are no cars and people are moving slowly. I heard tonight on the radio that they closed down Little Falls Parkway so that people could do social distancing. I can't quite figure that out because the cars are easily 6 feet away from each other. Anyway, but that's how different our life is. And so, as I said before, there's a really good elderly friend of mine who, Corrie ten Boom, who survived the prison camps. Her family was murdered in the Nazi camps for hiding Jews. They protected Jews. She said, this is what we see, like on the front of a tapestry. This is the complete picture of what we see ourselves to look like. This is how we would look if we, like for instance in Arlington, lived in Country Club Hills, or we lived in Georgetown, or those are enclaves of more wealthy people, but maybe not. Maybe a farm community, like a very humble farm community, like there's a little place called Boyce over here. It's not at all like Middleburg or anywhere else. It's just a simple community with hardworking people, construction workers, farmers. But we picture our life as being perfect no matter what it is. It may be being able to hang out at the bar on Saturday night and sing country music. It may be going to a concert at Kennedy Center. It may be going to the Met in New York. Whatever it is, that's how we see our lives. But as Corrie ten Boom said, on needlepoint we see the pretty side out. The back side has all the warts and the knots and everything. This is a little bit different. This is more interesting. Because the back, this painting, to do the painting, she took her palette and cut it down to fit the frame. And then she put her paints on the back and just left them there. And I think it's such a wonderful parable, because this is not what God sees when He sees us and gives us, redeems us and gives us opportunity. What He sees in this picture is where we can go from there and create something new. And I thought of it in terms of like a church building and business as usual. My friend was saying, I've been home now for a while. Who needs to hire pastors and have a building when I'm surviving fine on my own and can connect with people directly? And as we talk, we realize that, all of the things we try to do, we try to duplicate what should be reality. This is forcing some reality. Like last night, I always thought, wouldn't it be nice to sit by a fire someday and just enjoy just being present in the moment? And all of a sudden I thought, well, someday is right now, it's tonight, and so this may never come again, so I'm going to enjoy it while I can in the present. We live far too in the future and the past. That's one of our downfalls. So today I was talking to a good friend, and he was talking, and we were talking about, he has young children, spending time with his children. And he said, well, I can understand how hard it must be for you not having children, being alone. I just saw, Nathan and Abigail are going to come and stay at a B&B and help me build a garden in the back that we'll share for everyone, including Rachel if she comes down. Anyway, he said, well, it's all of our busyness. And I stopped and I said, wait a minute. Busyness is something you choose. You've chosen to say, well, I'm really busy, but I'll do it later. You choose busyness to not spend time with your kids. Too busy to go to a game. Too busy to watch your child's recital. The too busy is a choice that we make. And a good friend of mine talked about the activated self. We're not a victim of either our childhood or our circumstances. We choose what we allow to affect us. We allow ourselves to become victim of busyness, of overachievement. Like, instead of having an evening at home with your kids, you've got to have them in every sport that you can imagine and everything. All that's really good. But the competition and the kind of whirling dervish of activities that we have in this country for young kids and for parents, it's inhumane, and it eventually destroys us. And I think, if nothing else, this is just a horrible thing. The whole thing's a nightmare. But there can be something redemptive if you choose to do so, and you choose to live your life the way you always wanted to do it. You now have a chance. I really do have a chance now to read that book I haven't read. I do have a chance now to try writing. I'm going to start. I have a chance to spend time with friends on the phone or on FaceTime if I can't hug them. And I just saw a friend walking down the street, and she said, well, I see you out. I drive by all the time. We walk our dogs behind the church. I said, well, Leo, come on over and just let me know that you're coming, and I can sit out on the porch and you can be 12 feet away in my yard. My backyard's big enough that we really have a lot of people 10 feet away from each other. So think creatively. That's what this is about. God gives us fresh paint to shape our lives, and this fresh paint is actually His way of giving us freedom to become the person He intended us to be, what I call the Adamic self. I've been doing a study of the body, and I'm going to keep doing it, and that and intimacy, and what is true intimacy, and does God have favorites? Like, it just bugs me every time I read John the apostle whom Jesus loved. Does that mean he didn't love everybody else? Or did he have favorites? Those are all good questions. And some others. So I'm exploring that along with the importance of the body and touch, because touch is really important now that I don't have it. And it is for all of us. There's a friend of mine worked in Russia with orphans, and there was a newborn baby ward. Like Abigail's told me yesterday that there's a woman who got the coronavirus who just gave birth to her baby. She never got to see the baby. She died. She leaves 3 other children at home with her husband. So, life is short and it's fragile, and we need to live in the moment. And what God gives us with fresh paint is for us to create ourselves in His image and become who He always wanted us to be. We now have the chance to do that. We can choose. We're not victims of our circumstances and our busyness. We may be victims of our income, but we're not about other things. And so I just want to leave you with that. Like, to me, the institution of church, I love the institution of church. I love being here. and being part of the community. But the institution of church is kind of like this. It's like a finished portrait, and everybody tries to keep the building up, maintain it, make it beautiful, make it welcoming for other people, when actually what God wants us to do is to make the church something fresh and new, even with the old trappings and all its history and tradition, to use fresh paint to paint who He is through us to others who need love. So I hope that you think about this and get your brushes out and think about either writing or painting a conversation or painting a gift to someone that's shut in or a disability. So thank you all for listening tonight, and I'll be back tomorrow night, probably with chapter 14 and maybe a review of 13. So thank you again for coming, and tomorrow, tea time at 4, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday at 4, the rest of the time at 3. And tomorrow we'll go on with a little more with the Little Lame Prince. So thank you all for coming, and it's wonderful to see you, and God bless. Remember the fresh paint. Keep it fresh. And Rabbit, I'm glad you came by to see Punky. Punky doesn't seem very interested in talking to you. Anyway, the animal kingdom is peaceable at the moment. Thanks you all for coming. Bye.